our,
Oh, yeah, I suppose you.
our broader community, we need to,
I know you think of them that way.
she knows who you are.
Oh, does
I
she?
don't
Okay.
think, I don't know if she knows you, she just knows who you are, I can't tell, she's on some
Does
statewide, statewide tourism board?
Yeah.
Well, not yet.
Yeah. And I think the other
We were
thing
just
is
talking about that, I
shut
might have to
up.
do early in order to get
Try to
home.
build up.
We're supposed to get 12 hours.
Yeah, because they're, you know,
Well,
By the way, that's the vital link. I mean, if we function like a
I
community.
mean, worst case is I call my husband and say, you better start plowing because I'm getting home.
You know, and the promotion of that whole side of the park is just so important.
Yeah,
I wish
that's
we could
the,
find a way to work closer together. It's funny, I spoke to a couple business owners in East Glacier.
amazing to me.
It was before the tourism rush, and so I'd say to
For me, right?
them, in advertising with us, well, you know.
There was a time in my life that
What? Where do you get your newspaper now?
Yeah,
When we get the
no, I
tourism.
understand.
Washington or whatever.
They probably Great Falls.
it's like I'm standing.
Yeah,
Well,
work with
that's,
China, you know, I mean,
That's
it's
a really good point.
yeah, I mean, we have a natural relationship.
Okay.
We need to expand on it, including the tourism promotion, because
I said,
like I
well,
said,
we do
more
have
than
to get
anything,
groceries for
there
Thanksgiving.
were Junes
Well, I'm
and
not cooking, but I have to cook a few things.
advertise in a place where you're driving people to have
Yeah.
access, just like yours. And we keep coming around falls to advertise, you know, if we work
Oh,
together.
that's your lunch
This
too.
is all I get today. I got a late start up here, so I didn't get a chance
I
to.
did your day, though.
Doesn't ever know.
No, it's all your eyes, it's your eyes.
I know.
No, it's all the same, don't worry about it, it's the same color all the way through.
It's all.
Karen, we need to
Yep.
come over here.
A few flies, a few flies.
The dog
like-
sellers, they color there.
I've been giving it
Probably
lunch.
the fading, probably the lunch break. I'm sure it's probably the lunch break.
Oh, actually, they are.
I thought it was
Are they?
mine
I've
at
got
first.
ladybugs in my house.
Well, that's okay, they're good. Box elder bugs.
I'd rather have that, actually.
Where'd you go have it?
Here, Dr. Tierney.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
More nerves than I do.
It's must be the auditors.
What's that?
Must be the auditors.
Oh,
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm kinda
Gotta go clear
guessing.
your throat, get ready.
They look like they're ACs. You know, that clock.
Is it on?
My phone says
It's right
cold
on.
and snowy
Yep,
outside.
it's on.
It's like a weather rock, right?
That's why they call it a smartphone, huh?
It's smarter than us.
I took your yellow one.
Can I have a yellow?
Yeah, you have the yellow one.
All have full house, complete, everybody's here.
Okay, with a quorum of the board present, I call the meeting to order. Roll call. Commissioner Buck,
Here.
Commissioner Rooney,
Here.
Commissioner Hoban,
Here,
Commissioner Goodsa,
Here.
and Commissioner Swenson is here, but he's just not able to respond at this time. Commissioner Evans
Here.
and Commissioner Talcott's here. Would you please rise for the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. I'll read our mission and vision statement there. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Any items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. Consent agenda consists of the approval of the board minutes from October 27th, the approval of the Finance Committee meeting minutes from September 8th and November 17th of 2015, payroll checks totaling $73,035.53, the maintenance and operations checks totaling $759,262.48, the approval of the passenger facility charge totaling $120,000, and the financial reports for October. Does anybody have a motion on the consent agenda or any comments?
Move to accept it.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. John, do you have anything to report?
Yeah, just real briefly, we did get a business plan from Bravo 369. You may remember that's the group that brought the air show here this summer with the vintage airplanes. And they're interested in moving their Texan out here for potentially seasonal storage this winter, and then eventually to move it here permanently as part of an air museum. So they have written a business plan. They're composing ideas on how they might take advantage of our particular location. Has some unique benefits as compared to the Canadian location. Of course, you know, if you're familiar with military flying throughout the Canadian corridor, a lot of their military flying during World War II is up and down that stretch along the Alaska-Siberian Highway. So there's some other air museums that they could potentially partner with. The partnership with AvMax could be really advantageous. The owner of AvMax actually has a Warbird too, and they do some work on those. So there might be some benefit there. A few other benefits, including having the plane sort of back in its native environment where many of these airplanes flew on their way up to Russia. So as opposed to Bellingham, where there really isn't a history of that particular plane during the war. Obviously Boeing Field and some of the other airfields in that area had a lot of bomber presence and other planes, but these particular airplanes that Bravo 369 are interested in working on are more pertinent to our history. So that continues to move forward. We're very excited about it. We did get a drawing from them, which we'll include in our master plan in that general aviation area down there. That just gives us the opportunity to proceed on a project like that without a tremendous amount of additional environmental review or discussion with the FAA, because it will already be included in the master plan. So those discussions continue to move forward. I think there's still a lot more that needs to be done to make that come to fruition, but I've been encouraged over the last month that it is proceeding. So good to report there. On the passenger side, we had a record October, and passengers grew by about 6%. And I think that's largely to do with our Canadian campaign, which we've been very happy with. We're in the last few days of that campaign, wrapping up here in the next week or so. And it's really raised our profile in Calgary in particular. We've got a lot more folks online as Facebook friends, a lot more people that are coming to our website than we've ever had before out of that market. So I'm encouraged by that. And the 6% growth record October, I think, is a good indication of our ability to influence that market. So
Can you tell if they're coming from Calgary?
we don't have a good means of monitoring who the additional passengers are, but when you look at the stark contrast between even the website visitations, where Calgary's up like 300% in terms of year over year visiting our website, while Great Falls is in the 30% range, I have to think that we're beginning to build more business out of Canada. And the parking lot continues to look, very heavily Canadian influence, which it often does anyway. But parking revenue alone was up $6,000 in October. So, I think again that's probably due to that Canadian influence. But no, we don't have a real good means of identifying where they're from. Nobody collects that data and shares it. We know where they're taking off from and where they're going. That's about all we know.
Just imagine what it would be if their dollar was worth something.
Yeah. I think historically it's at a fairly stable level. I mean, if you look back to even the 90s, this is there for a long time. It was kind of right at that 7.6, 7.9, 7.8. It was kind of forever at that level. So we're not too far off of historic levels. But yeah, if they strengthen again, then with our pricing the way it is, I think it's really an opportunity. I mean, right now Las Vegas is routinely around $100 round trip. Phoenix right in the same ballpark, and California, most of the cities are under $250 round trip. I think it's just a great time to be selling those types of fares. And you see it in our numbers. Alaska had another decent month. They got another 700 passengers, which is 28% growth. Again, the second month in a row, they've been able to get about 30% growth. Almost exactly the same number of additional passengers, 700 right on the nose. last month also. So they've gotten to about 72% load, which is good. They would tell you their system average for that airplane is around 76. So we still need to get about another 4% growth, but I don't see them pulling down 50% of the capacity over 4% growth. So I think we're safely in that zone that if we can build from here, that flight's going to be successful long term. And I think that's really terrific. You know, we've now increased capacity in that market substantially, about a third more capacity, and it looks like we're absorbing it. So that's really positive. I think everything, all signs there look good. Also, and if you read the weekly report, you might have seen this already, but currently in the April schedule, United is switching to a larger plane. They're going to a 76-seater that would have first-class service to Denver, which is really positive for us too. Again, that's another 20 seats per flight, plus the first class, I think, which will be very important for them market share-wise. It helps them to compete with those West Coast routes that go through Salt Lake. And Texas and other routes like that, because now they'll have a first-class cabin, which Salt Lake does not have. So a little bit of a strategic advantage right now for United come April. So that's really encouraging. Just quickly on construction, the project's largely complete. You probably saw it coming in today. Most of the equipment's off-site now. We still have some signs to erect. The big overhead sign, the poles are not quite done. That'll go up the first week or two of December. There's a few other sign panels that haven't been installed yet. That are still being fabricated, and they'll come back and put those up along with the overhead sign. And then the light poles still are not on site either. So the Value Park right now is fairly dark at night. That road down there, the exit's fairly dark. Rod's been working with the Guard to try and get their park lights on, because for some reason their park lights aren't functioning right now in that little air park there. But over the next 3-4 weeks, that'll be resolved with our lights going into the Value Park. You probably saw today there's about a few more than a dozen cars already in Value Park. The very astute followers of the airport that have already realized there's a discount there. Surprisingly, when I went out yesterday, there was only one Great Falls tag. So I think it's doing exactly what we hope to do, which is help us compete with passengers that might not otherwise park here or might not otherwise fly out of here. It's really one of the things we want to do. And as we fill up over the next day or two, we're hoping to attract the families that might not otherwise park here. Might have someone drop them off. So we'll see how that goes over the next couple of days to fill in that lot. The metered lot's supposed to open today. The machine's installed. You might have seen it out there. The stalls are ready. They're trying to get the software uploaded. Republic's working on that today, and hopefully that'll go live at some point today too. So then those stalls will be available too. And I think that'll be great. I mean, I was watching today. This is the peak time of year for the short-term lot. And it was easily over 2/3 full. Still a lot of people parking there long term, which is fine. I mean, there's some people that need that convenience or just desire it and are willing to pay for it. And once we get these stalls open, that'll help with the people coming up to pick up and drop off. And then lastly, I passed out a memo. You'll see here, just in the last couple of days, there's been more developments on the runway program. And I'll give you a couple minutes to maybe look through this, because I think we do need to at least consider it.
Does anybody have any questions?
So,
I do.
oh yeah.
Maybe because I wasn't here last month, but if the FAA is not supposed to consider the military flights, why would they discount the occasional passenger flight in coming to that 1 inch versus 1.5 inches?
So it's kind of an interesting dilemma, and this is right in the crosshairs of the difficult part of the design standards. And they're trying to, as I said in the first option, they're trying to rewrite some of that right now. The way they're viewing the runway is it's a crosswind runway. So it's only needed for 5% of the time for the commercial jets. According to the FAA, 5% cancellations is acceptable. So what they're saying is if you have some limited use by the passenger planes, that's acceptable. The other way we could attack it is we could say, well, then it's a secondary runway that's needed because it's being used by these commercial airlines, and we could try for a capacity argument. We don't have enough traffic on it yet to make the capacity argument, but we likely will in the lifespan of the current repair. The 20-year life of this current project, we will likely have the traffic on it to make a compelling argument for a secondary runway. So we end up in this no man's land where we have substantial use of this runway by military planes. Their guidance says they should not consider military usage. The guidance does allow them latitude to justify a runway based on other criteria, which they're choosing not to do. We knew that the width was going to be an issue. Part of that's driven by the retirement of the 727s because FedEx quit flying them here about a year ago, and now they have no way to get into the airport when we have a runway closure or a significant crosswind because 757 can't land on 100 feet. So when, 4 or 5 years ago, when we were doing the optimization study to select the runways, we thought we were going to go to 100 feet, and that was going to work okay because they would buy Airbus 318s to replace 727s, similar sized plane. And what they've said is we're not doing that. We're going to keep 757s as our smallest plane. And so, in addition to that, we got assigned the C-130 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, and that has added additional complexity to the situation because the types of training they do here, for instance, the night operations, it's about 2,000 operations we're planning on putting on 16. We don't want those night operations flying over West Hill if we can avoid it, because it will make the noise issue worse. And we don't really want the kind of drops and substantial downtime that they have on their runway when they're training, because they're flying a formation of multiple planes. They don't want to break up the formation, which means the runway downtime is significant between operations. So I've tried to argue to the FAA that it's not in as much the military impact as it is the impact on the neighborhoods and the impact on the other users of the airport, that if you move these onto the primary, it makes a big problem. But they're really reluctant to go after that argument because they're so staunchly against paying for military infrastructure. And they're saying, basically these taxpayers should not pay for military infrastructure is kind of their line. So we have kind of the 4 options. Even in the base case, we're going to have $800,000 in local matching funds that go into the project. We had talked last month about an additional $500,000. I think it's closer to $400,000 to pay for the additional width to get to 150 feet. I think in any scenario, that's a wise investment because it allows any airplane serving the airport to use the runway for the long haul. And so I think that's a wise investment. Then there's a question of thickness. They're saying, well, we shouldn't pay for the full thickness to serve these airplanes because the military are ineligible and you're not using enough commercial planes on it to justify the additional thickness. So the 2 options that are there are either we build the weaker section and we wait and see if there's any damage, our engineer really doesn't think there would be. He thinks we could probably operate that way without any problems for the full life of the pavement.
The 1 inch or the 1.5?
The 1 inch. He really thinks we can go that way, or we pay for the additional strength up front, and then the runway should be capable of handling anything we throw at it for the next 20 years. So that difference is we got $800,000 no matter what, $400,000 extra for the width, and then on top of that, another $350,000 for the strength. And what I'm recommending is sort of a 3.5 here. I'm saying let's bid it as an ad alternate, and that gives us a few more months to pursue military funding, which might be a possibility. We can talk to the delegation about that, or maybe the delegation getting a write-in on the FAA bill to say, no, you will pay for that, or some other pool of funds that are as of yet unidentified. Or it's cheap enough that we just say, let's just do it now and be done with it in the bid, and we go ahead and spend the additional money. So that's kind of what I'm recommending, and I think right now what I would say is the recommendation we made last month, let's just keep that $500,000 in place, we'll wait till the spring bid, see what happens, and then bring back a recommendation at that time for the funding level.
So it's pretty realistic that the military would kick in?
I don't think so. The FAA seems to think so. My guess is probably not.
What about when you talk about pooling of our funds, are you talking about pooling with some other source or just?
Well, the PFC one is an argument I think we can make because the line in there, there's one line in the whole thing that said that takes out the military funding. Otherwise, this would be eligible. It's an airfield cost. It's a runway cost used by multiple tenants, so by every other standard, it is eligible. But there's a line in the FAA guidance that says, for the purposes of funding, government-owned airplanes will not be considered. And so my point is, yes, for the purposes of funding pertaining to the AIP program, but as it relates to PFC, it's still eligible infrastructure. So we're going to try to make that argument to see if we can use our PFC funds. As of yet, the FAA isn't sure, if that'll work, because there are a number of things that are PFC eligible that are not AIP eligible. So we'll try that. The other way we just pull our funds, we get a good enough bid and we just say, okay, it's a couple $100,000 more, let's spend that money and get it done. We'll have a better look when we generate the airline rates at the end of the year, kind of where we are. If the traffic's picking up, we might be able to, pay for it through our own operating budget over a couple of years.
When you bid it as an add-on, and sorry about my ignorance on this, they're bidding the major project first as though it could stand alone.
Yes, base bid.
So any moving equipment, all the costs of getting everything up here, that's all built into that. All we're paying for is, it would be a good deal.
Well, right, and so what we'd be saying is instead of a 1 foot section, just assume a 1 inch section, assume a 1.5 inch section instead of a 1 inch section. So basically you're just buying off the bid quantity of asphalt, additional asphalt. And that can all be, the nice thing is that, whether it's 1 or 1.5, that's all one lift. So it doesn't require 2 pavement runs over the whole thing. So you wouldn't expect the price to be different than really the volume of the asphalt. Yeah, exactly. The man hours, everything else, survey, it should all be roughly the same.
So, excuse me, if we proceeded with number 3.5, so to speak, I'm trying to understand the time frame, would you be waiting for the bids or would you be pursuing the other things too, the military?
We would be pursuing the other things while we wait for the bids.
Okay.
And then, come bid time, we would come back with, we recommend that we don't do it at all and we just proceed with 3, and maybe the recommendation is we move more operations onto the primary for the C-130s, so it takes less of a beating, and we just don't do it. Or the delegation says that we can pursue this funding. The base, the MANG base, has big plans around that 1634 complex. They would like to have a dirt strip over there, and of course all those airplanes are going to be taxiing across that infrastructure. So we want to make sure that we don't do something to hinder their long-term ability to stay here. That obviously isn't good for the community at all.
So at the last meeting, we pledged up to $500,000.
Yep.
Prior to that, how much had we pledged?
We had planned in their CIP for $800,000. It's kind of the local match on that one.
So it's 8 plus 500.
It's 8 plus 500 plus another 250, we think, unless we can find another way to fund it.
So that's what we're looking at is the 250, and we'll find out in the spring after the bids.
Yeah.
Is one option.
Yes.
And we can make
Mind
the
up.
decision then.
Yeah. That's my recommendation for the time being. You know, the other thing we could, I mean, you know, we could do some of these other options. We could just, you know, fold, and say 100 foot's fine, and the FAA would pay for everything, you know, except for our $800,000 ante, but you know, they would pay for the remainder of it. The problem is in the long term, getting back to 150 feet once you're to 100 is going to be, I mean, quite frankly, probably impossible. Because at that point, they're going to want us to pay to move the signs out, to rerun the conduit, redo all the electrical work, you know, widen the thing out, probably go back through the drainage, because now you've allowed the areas outside the primary surface to grow up and not be maintained at the proper airfield drainage. I mean, it just becomes a much harder project to get it back once you've given it up.
Okay, so 1634, can it handle all our commercial flights throughout the summer?
At 150 feet, it can.
It can.
Yes, it can. The MD-80 would struggle with the density altitude depending on the heat. But the MD-80 is being phased out by Allegiant in favor of the Airbus 318 and 319, which is capable of using that runway at the length and width at 150 feet. And a lot of them can use 100 feet. You know, the regional jets, which we have today, in the long term, those are going to be phased out too. But the regional jets we have today can use 100 feet. Even the Airbus can probably use it. It's so close, it would be company policy as to whether they would use 100 feet or 150 feet. Clearly, FedEx cannot use it at all at 100 feet.
Your 350,000 for the additional depth, John, that came from the engineer?
Yes, that's the engineer's estimate.
So would you put it out to bid at 1 inch with an add-alt for
Yep.
another half inch?
Exactly.
Where it comes in at?
Exactly, and that's what we're proposing is, you know, the base design would be a 1-inch overlay, you get a mill out, but then a 1-inch overlay, and then that add alternate would be a 1.5-inch overlay instead.
Are there any further questions?
A
Comments?
few points. The MILCON request for military construction, if they were to participate in building or enhancing the runway, it is on an annual cycle where it has to be submitted in September, not later than. That goes into the future years defense program, which has a 5-year cycle, which is reviewed each year. There are a lot of things that influence that, such as the future of the aircraft. The future of the aircraft is also going to be influenced by what they call military utility. For instance, if we were to lose all of our airspace out here, then we would have less military utility for, say, a fighter mission, although it may not affect a transport mission. The future of the C-130 as a large fleet is gravely in doubt, frankly, and everybody is looking for the next transport aircraft if they're transport advocates. And that's typically going to be the C-17. C-17's gross weight is roughly 3 times that of a C-130 when it's fully loaded, which means it will require thicker asphalt. So I think it's prudent to go with the 150-foot wide runway, because that won't prevent enhancing the asphalt later on. At a minimum, I'd recommend talking to the Guard about submitting a MILCON request for another inch of asphalt. If we can get 2 inches, that'll be far better for the potential future C-130 replacement. And but if you go with the wider runway right now, then that doesn't line you out for consideration for other things later on. But it will take some time. It could take 2 years before you get any resolution on whether there will be additional funding from the Air Force for that.
And that's my guess. And you know, we can always go back and mill and add. It gets more expensive, obviously, you know, but that is one potential outcome. If we went after 3, it may take 2 or 3 years to identify the funding, but we might be able to do it at a later date through MILCON, you know, or some other funding pool where they would come in, take out a 1/2 inch, and then add back in 1.5 inches or something like that to get the strength they need.
Right. Also, if you put down 1 inch worth on a wider strip, One of the requirements the C-130 pilots have are practice of assault landings. And depending upon the skill of the pilot, that can either be firm or very, very firm. And so you would wind up with quite a bit of damage to particularly the touchdown zone on that runway. And if you told them they couldn't do that, then that would affect operations. They'd have to do those on the main runway.
Yep.
And you're going to get that kind of damage and wear on the main runway then instead, which would be less than desirable too. That's really about it. If you're going to engage a congressional delegation, I would add another year to that timeline, because it will take them that long to use their contacts to push for the military construction dollars that can be added to the FIDEP for that, the future years defense plan.
And I don't know what the ability is to reimburse out of that pool. See, with AIP, we could continue to argue this for several years, and we might ultimately prevail, and then we can be refunded. I mean, for instance, as I said to the FAA today, what if, we have enough 757 operations on that runway in the next few years to justify this secondary runway? Well, then the entire thing would be eligible, and potentially we could be refunded. That's not likely to happen in the next few years, but I mean, that's the problem we're in, is we're in this window where there's not quite enough activity, but there is substantial activity there. And for the future, that's important, because ideally this runway will get to the point where it's busy enough that it's eligible for, the full 150-foot width, full depth in the future for future projects. Ideally, that's where we'll get to in the next 20 years after this project.
Yes.
Well, the primary reason we're doing this is FedEx and the National Guard are contemplating spending the 1.3 million.
There was an additional consideration, and that is if we ever had to close our main runway, that we might get a dent in the business that's not recoverable.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at...
But shouldn't we be looking to those two entities to recoup the investment?
Well, ultimately, that's where, all of our airfield costs come out of, as the users of the airfield. MAG doesn't, the way our relationship works, they get free use of the airfield, we get free use of the fire department, and their operations center. We estimate that's probably worth about $1.5 million a year. So they're a significant contributor to the operation through expense reimbursement. FedEx, on the other hand, pays 40% of all of our landing fees. So they're the biggest single contributor to the airfield cost anyway. So eventually, if you think about it, I mean, they pay for, really all of these projects in large proportion. But what Commissioner Buck said is exactly right. If the arrestor barriers need to come out in the next year or two, we're going to have a full runway closure for weeks while that project takes place. If we have a 1634 that can handle our whole fleet, that enables us to do that without a major interruption to our revenue. Billings a few years ago had their closure, and their summer passengers went down 30%, and they were only closed on the weekends for, I think, about 5-6 weeks, and it impacted their traffic by about 30% during the summer months. Each of those passengers is $20 a head.
Any other questions? If not, then if we don't take any action, then we can deal with the issue later.
The other
in December if something changes, or after the bid.
Right. The two options are, the board could call for a revisit of the last action at the December meeting, which is our holiday party. Right now, we don't have a meeting, but we can have a business meeting that day. We need to get it decided because the FAA is programming next year's funds right now, and they need to know for sure if we're going to take the money and do something or not. And so we could address it again at the December meeting and just decide not to proceed with the additional work, or to take one of these other options, or we can just stay with the guidance we have right now, which is to commit the $500,000 towards runway widening and wait and see how the bid comes out in spring.
And commit the funds at that time.
And commit the funds at that time. Right.
Is there any objection to just...
That would give us time to work with the engineering department over at the Air Guard, and also the budgeting people over at the Air Guard, to see if this could be inserted into the 2017 program objective memorandum to go into the FIDEP.
Yeah.
And find out whether or not there's any appetite for that. Now, if I were going to be combative with the FAA, I'll add, I would ask them, why did they not consider C-130 landings, but they do seem to be interested in C-130 hangars when it comes to airfield operations?
Yeah, and I think that is part of the frustration over there at the Guard too, is difficulty with that hangar and now difficulty with the runway.
And all of those
Letting
things
go around.
All those things make it much more likely that when they go to remove C-130s from the fleet, that Montana, with its one representative in Congress, may have a tough time holding on to them.
Okay, so if there's no objection, then we won't take any action on that until the bids come in.
Okay,
Is that the end of the director's report?
that is the end of the director's report.
Any further questions of the director or anything on his report? Okay, then we'll move to the first item on the agenda, and I suspect one of you is Annette and one of you might be Sarah. Is that a good guess? And are you guys proposing, or presenting the report?
We are,
Okay,
we are.
You're up
Mind
then.
if I put my thing right here?
Sure.
Okay.
just don't bite him.
Okay, thank you. I am Annette Hill. I'm a partner with Anderson Mullen, and I'd like to introduce Sarah Stanger. For those of you that don't know, Sarah is a senior audit manager with our firm, and she managed the audit this year, and I'm the partner on the audit. New faces for some of you. I know you're used to seeing Rick, and probably most recently Capri in the prior years. So Sarah and I are new on the job. However, Sarah did work on your job, I think 5 years ago and before. So we both have airport experience and governmental experience. So we're happy to be here. Thanks for allowing us a few minutes. I do want to let you know that we met with your audit committee and reviewed this very thick report in great detail, had great discussion, very in-depth meeting, I thought. Good questions, good comments, and we did go through the numbers in detail. I think, I can't speak for them, I'd like for them to speak for themselves if they'd like to, but I think they were comfortable with the report that you have in front of you here, and I'm not sure if you guys want to speak to that or...
Any comments from the audit committee?
I'm very happy with everything we saw. As we looked through the report, I'm glad to have these people with us on the audit. I think they were helpful not only in getting the thing done, which is kind of a box checker for us, but in offering us some expertise because they do so many audits, and they're just excellent to work with, and that's the impression I get from Maria, that it just was very much appreciated the work that was done. And I'd say as we went over that report, when you compare year to year, normally to shift an organization of this size of the airport and get it to move forward is a slow progress, slow event.
Process.
It takes, process, thank you. It takes a lot of years to actually see some progress, but you could see it in just the 2 years, the progress that was made at the airport. John and his staff have done a great job with the things that we've done with the debt and the building and the increases that we've made. It's an amazing job, and things it was just the report pulled those things out. It was just great.
This is really the first year, if you look back 2 years, the first full year of results with the new terminal in place and then with the new debt in place. I mean, we're finally to, you have partial year results given our business cycle because we opened in October on the terminal side. We did the financing mid-year, the year prior. So this is the first year of the new environment, and so you kind of see some of the results of what we've been doing the last couple of years.
Yeah.
It's pretty evident. It's just quite a compliment to you and what you've built.
Dan, you have
So
comments?
I'd share most of Dick's responses. I think it was good to work with the team this year. We went through quite a process last year to try to get where we wanted to go. Unmodified, I think, is the terminology today. Might change next year as things do. We ran up against some new regulations. But we also had a chance to talk to these two a bit after the audit without John and Maria in the room. And while they weren't willing to sign any statements like good auditors and accountants, they take no liability for anything. There were just, it was good, positive comments after you guys left the room. They had some good things to say about the operations up here, and I don't mean the performance operations, the operations as it pertains to the financial statements and the records that were pulled together and working with Maria. And I think that's important. Given last year, we saw how difficult things can be, even when it's something relatively minor. So I'd just like to say you guys did a phenomenal job. The audit went very well, and there was nothing surprising. And the performance of the airport as well did clearly come out. You guys have done a good job on that as well, John, you and your team.
No, thank you.
I concur with these two gentlemen, they're smarter than I. The one thing the form at 91 pages is daunting and borderline ridiculous. I mean, it's just, there isn't that much to be conveyed, in my humble opinion.
Okay. Well,
But he
thank
read
you for
it, he read the whole thing. Didn't you say that?
I did.
Yes.
Well, isn't it the new pension disclosures?
Yeah.
Like
Yes,
15
Wow.
pages?
So
Wow.
thank you guys for the comments, and we'll dive right in, and I'm not going to drag you through the 91 pages that we made these poor folks go through. We do appreciate their time to do that. I know they did their homework before they came, which is a daunting task, so thank you very much for doing that. I would just like to point out a couple of the highlights of the audit this year. Again, as they mentioned, it's an unmodified opinion. There's really 4 separate reports in this. I really want to just talk about kind of the structure of the report to kind of explain why there's 91 pages involved and give you the results of that and then open it up for questions. And of course, Sarah's here because she was so much in the managerial technical part of doing the actual number crunching and that kind of thing. So she's also available for questions should you want to get to that level. But anyway, I want to just tell you that there are 4 separate audit reports in here. So the one, some of you may sit on other boards of other kinds of organizations. Governmental is the highest level of audit that we have, that and public companies. And so they require a lot of work to be done and a lot of reporting. So some audit reports you see only have 1 report. Some might have a combination of 1 or 2 or 3, that kind of thing. Yours actually has 4. 1 over the entire financial statement, and that's the one that starts on page 2. This is the one that, kind of the big picture, and I want you to know that that is an unmodified opinion. There are, it's several pages long, lots of words in there, lots of different sections, but the section that you probably are most interested in is at the top of page 3, in a bolded area called opinion, just simply 1 paragraph that says that your financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with generally accepted auditing or generally accepted accounting principles in the United States. That's what you're interested in. Financial statements are materially correct. There's some other paragraphs in here that tell you the different levels of opinion and that kind of thing that we give on different parts of the report. They're all unmodified, all clean, if you want to think of it that way. No deficiencies, no significant deficiencies, material weaknesses, nothing of that sort. It does talk about other information that is in this 91 pages other than just the financial statements. Starting on page 5, you'll see a section called Management's Discussion and Analysis. This is a section that John and Maria and their staff really put together, and it really tells the story of the airport. It was real interesting to me to see your audit committee really focus on this, and that's a great thing. It makes it a really valuable tool, which is its design. Telling the story of the airport in a summarized fashion numerically. The numbers are more summarized, but you have an opportunity here, management has an opportunity to tell what really happened and why things changed. So that's what this management discussion and analysis is. Need you to know that we do not opine on that because that is management's document. Okay, so a lot of times people just want to read this story, and that's great. We do look at it to make sure that it agrees, the numbers agree with the numbers in the financial statements. So you should know that they do agree to the financial statements that follow. Okay, So after management's discussion and analysis, we really move on. There's a lot of good graphs in there and lots of information that we're unable to present to you in a true financial statement format. So that's the value here. And again, like I said, I saw your audit committee really focus on a lot of those numbers to read the story of the year. Starting on page 20 comes the part that Sean referred to as sort of it's daunting. It starts out with the financial statements, and then there's a whole set of required financial statement disclosure footnotes that are required to be there. And that's to conform with accounting standards, as we referred to. So I don't want to drag you through line by line, but I would point out some highlights. Just overall, that your assets increased real modestly, but they increased, and that's a good thing. Some of the things we talked about at the audit committee were things like the cash decreased, and you'll see that when we get to a cash flow statement, but your investments increased, and you also significantly invested in infrastructure and those kinds of things, which you always do. So you can't ever focus on one line like cash and try to determine the health of the organization based on that. Some organizations you can, but this one is large. You have almost $100 million balance sheet here that you're looking at. So focusing on one item like cash is not going to tell you the story. Really, you've been hearing it all year. Your infrastructure improvements, your all of the investments that you've been making, the things that you do, and performing the services that you do for this community. So again, mild increase, a modest increase in assets. Turning to page 21, this is just tying out your balance sheet on the liability side and also the net position side or the equity side of this. I was asked by the audit committee to kind of stop and take just a minute to talk about net position. The net position, or the equity portion of this financial statement, is broken up into three categories. The first one is the big one, net investment in capital assets. And John talked a lot about that and what that means. It blows up the balance sheet because we have so much money tied up in capital assets here. And then we talked about the other two line items, restricted and unrestricted. So I just really want to talk about unrestricted net position. That really is your equity that's available for you to use day-to-day operations, whatever you see fit to use it on. So I wanted to stop on that for just a minute. Don't know if you guys have questions or comments on that. I know that was a point that we talked about at the meeting last week. And then turning to page 22, really wanted to just give you the picture of your operations. This is your statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in that net position, really your income statement. Very summarized, talks about operating revenues, operating expenses, gets down to your income or loss from operations. That changed from last year to this year. You can see I'm about a third of the way down the page. The income is a positive income this year. Now keep in mind that this is only part of what you do. I mean, all of the other things that you do, like grant income and FAA building and all that kind of stuff, is not included in that number. So this is just day-to-day operations. Okay, then we come down to those non-operating revenues and expenses that I just spoke of, including investing activities and capital contributions down 2/3 of the way down the page. That's really your grant income. We talked about that some at the meeting as well, so I thought that was important to point out. So the bottom line here is that you have a change in net position of $658,000 net loss. But keep in mind, I mean, you're not a for-profit business and you're to make money, and a lot of that is depreciation, just using up your assets, non-cash expense. And then we do have a prior period adjustment, and this is what the big thing of the year, and I think one of your folks here already mentioned it, is the big pension adjustment. Across the United States this year, there was a new standard for governments, and you now need to recognize a liability for PERS, or the pension liability that you have out there for your employees. And so that adjustment came in this year, and that was a lot of work for every government across the nation and in Montana. And the state of Montana really took that on and worked with all of the governments and the auditors in Montana to make it happen. And Sarah, I'm really proud to say, I already bragged about her at our audit committee meeting, last week that she was really the leader in our firm to understand this and take this on and make it her own and work with the state and other partners in our firm in all of our offices to make sure this is right. So there is a prior period adjustment. Now that probably scares you after last year. We had a prior period adjustment that ended up being, we had deficiency discussion and all that kind of thing. This is different. This is a standard. This is not anything that management made any error on, anything else. It's a standard that changed nationwide, but it requires a prior period adjustment. So all it does is affects your equity bottom line to carry forward. Okay, just an adjustment made this year. Next year it will disappear. Okay.
Is that for future contributions?
It's for, yes, it's not contributions, but actual liability to pay out to employees. Okay, so when they retire. And it's an estimate, and that's why it was so important that all the people involved work as a team, you know, including the state of Montana that's holding that money, and all the different players work as a team to make sure we were all in the same level here, and that people were, you know, Peter was saying the same thing Paul was saying.
So that's implying that we have our own retirement system, or we are paying into one and that's our portion of one?
Mm-hmm. It's your portion. You're paying into one, and if the state of Montana was unable to pay, this is an estimate of what you might have to pay.
It's a potential liability if the state should default that we could be on the hook for. Right, in the prior year adjustment, which you said will disappear, but there will be an entry for it every year going forward.
Oh.
But it will be much smaller going forward. This year was the year that you have to take the hit for all of the prior years. Okay, so it's a one-time adjustment. There will be an adjustment each year, but it will just run through your income statement like any other expense, and you won't notice it as much. But it's a big discussion this year at every government meeting.
Is that amount unfunded by the state?
No.
Underfunded might be the term.
Underfunded.
Underfunded by the state.
Underfunded. And
you know,
there's a lot of disclosure
information
in here about this in a footnote, which you pointed out. Also lengthened the report significantly just with these pension footnotes. And they refer you to places you can go look online to determine, you know, what the state's funding situation is and that kind of thing. So,
My readings, I gather that what this is intent to do is to make visible the actual liability, which previously has been not visible.
exactly.
And so it's a more realistic assessment of what we're getting into, particularly if we go to increase that liability through legislation and such. So,
But it does depend on whether or not you feel the state could potentially default on their public employees' retirement system. That's the only time we would face any true liability, which would be a cash liability. Today it's a non-cash liability.
Right, because you have been paying into that system. So if that system is sound, the money is there. And if it's earning what they predict with all their actuaries and everything every year, the money is there. And you know this has been such a topic over the last 10 or 20 years even. Businesses have moved significantly out of defined benefit type plans and into defined contribution to avoid this potential liability should the retirement money not be there.
I read that in many cases, the projections for return on investment for these funds is unrealistically high, and that's continuing to generate increased liability because they're failing to meet their target growth of those funds. So I don't think it's entirely unlikely that there will be a default on some or many of these pension plans, because they're simply using unrealistically high numbers for return on investment in these funds.
Well, we hope that these systems are audited.
Within all the states.
And, we hope they're audited, the plans are audited, they have to happen, periodically to make those adjustments as we go, and that's the whole design of this system. Show the liability, audit it, with independent auditors to make sure that and that's a whole different kind of auditing. And they have actuaries that make those estimates that you're speaking of, and some are going to be high, some are going to be low, and hopefully they come in and audit to see actual results and then make adjustments accordingly. So, you know, that's a big picture, high level from somebody that doesn't audit those kinds of plans. So I'm just kind of talking at my layman's terms knowledge of that.
Yeah, our kids will pay for it.
Yeah. But Commissioner Buck, from your statement, is this the first step where the state may be planning through legislation to make this into a cash liability for us?
I think they would like to. I think the purpose of this change is so that there's some sunshine on whether or not these plans are performing as they've been advertised to perform over time. When the legislators vote to
Increased
benefits, they often do so ignoring the advice of history and accountants, and they accept the numbers that are in the plan as if they're realistic. Sometimes these numbers are 8, 9, 10% or more return on investment annually. We haven't seen that historically. But by making the actual liability more visible, it may make it less likely that they're going to be willing to accept unrealistic projections for growth and begin to constrain the problem. But at a certain point, if it becomes obvious that they can't fund it, then that'll be the next step.
And I think some of the reason they do this, I mean, from what I've read on it, is they want to make it visible to the governments, because we're less of the target more than the cities, right? I mean, what they're trying to get through to the public is, you know, you, the public, through your property taxes, may be on the hook for this if the state, you know, continues to oversell the program.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's the real intent of it. It's not so much, we end up as kind of a casualty of what's going on. What they're trying to do is get out to the taxpayer what the potential taxpayer liability is to the cities, counties, and other governments who are supported by taxpayers if the thing continues to grow out of.
Right, and then the shifting of the burden becomes airport-specific bonds that they try to pass, increases in property taxes and so on. And unfortunately, we can't control that because this is a lot tied up into the PERS, right? Public Employee Retirement System. So all public employees will be driving our liabilities here at the airport.
That's a good point too, yeah, or not, yeah.
So they really can't, it's recognizing the liability, but they can't come to us for the additional funding. It's a taxpayer issue.
More than likely.
Well, unless they increase your contribution in the future for each individual, that's how.
Well, I know, but the employees have already paid in
Yeah.
for an expected
Yeah,
defined benefit in the future.
And
So
so-
to come back and ask for more money for what they've already paid in for a defined benefit, that means it's either got to be the taxpayers or the employer, and I would think that the employer would say the same thing as the employee, saying, we already paid in.
yeah.
So,
Because then you're going to be faced with insolvencies and everything else. I mean, how much of that you could really collect that way? You know, I don't know. I mean,
It wouldn't be unreasonable for the state to pass legislation adding a tax to the airfares. I could see them trying to find money in either.
well, what you see in other states, you know, Colorado and Washington have gone through, and I don't know how many revisions Montana's been through, but just in the time I was in both of those states, where they start is with the future beneficiaries, right? So what they do is when you sign on to the plan, they make tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and the benefit declines. In almost all states that I've worked in, they've gotten rid of the defined benefit, and it's now defined contribution. So you know what you're going to put in, and you'll get whatever benefit that grows at. So what they've done is cap the liability, you know, at today's number, which is still going to be there until these beneficiaries are gone, but they've capped the increases to that in the future, I guess is the best way to say it, because no one's assured anything in the future programs in other states. So I don't know if Montana, I think they've made some revisions to the tiers now. I don't know if they're completely defined benefit at the new employee level, but that's what they do first to shore it up, and then they get, you know, there's the discussion of cutting the benefits of existing beneficiaries too, which one of these things, which
you can't do that.
it's tough to do.
You
Yeah.
can't
But if
do
it's
that. It's
insolvent,
illegal.
But
It's-
well,
it's-
but if it's
one of the
insolvent, then
problems is-
you're into the creditor pool.
One of the problems is if you try to shift to defined contribution plans for every employee hired after date X, then there's pushback on that because they're counting on those funds coming in from the new employees to actually fund current outlays for existing pensioners. So they like to perpetuate the program as is if they can, kick it down the road.
And that's what the legislature did 2 sessions ago. They kicked the can 5 years down the road, and it'll be taken up again in this next.
I think they put in a lump sum of some sort, though,
Well,
to help.
yeah, they
a little
threw
bit.
$500-600 million into the state,
combination
from
of
the
the
general
two.
fund into the pension to shore it up, to give it a 5-year additional lifespan. But that's coming up again, and they have not made any progress whatsoever in the state of Montana on a defined contribution.
Yeah.
They've
Right now,
made
it's a piece of advice
zero
forever.
progress.
Colorado and Washington both went to that. Washington, while I was there, actually went to that
For airport employees
for
or
all
state
public
employees?
employees.
Oh, you gotta be kidding
No,
me. How'd
those-
that ever get passed?
I don't know. I mean,
Some
they,
point, at some
but they
point.
did it.
Fiscal responsibility at some point
And the best part
has
was
to
the
come
state
into play.
sent somebody
They're no
to,
different than private industry,
Yeah.
right? Most
No, it isn't.
corporations
No, it's
have gone
considerably
to-
different because it's legislated.
No, it's the same.
And
the same
it's more
problem.
political. It's the same problem. It's the
Insolvency
same
is
problem.
the same problem regardless of whether you're at a governmental level or a private end.
Except for you can tax the difference.
Yeah,
It's Social
absolutely, if you can
Security.
get people to buy into it. We're a little off topic.
I would
It
What the
was
state's
just a
trying to
question,
do
okay.
And what the legislature's attempting to gain doesn't really
Well,
pertain, other than if we're
Is
sitting in
is it a liability to us? Is that a real liability that we just added on? That's the question,
The standard is telling you, yes, it is, and they implemented the standard.
according to our accountant, yeah. Our CPAs, it is a liability. That's what
According
it says
to-
right there.
According to accounting standards. not
According to accounting
Yes,
standards.
we're the auditor, we're not, the
That's not
standard
even,
says
that's not even
so.
accounting standards, it's a state mandate today that we recognize
Yes,
that
it
liability.
is, it is.
Okay, so who is the accounting standards?
The accounting standards are set by a national board, actually, yeah.
But is it governmental, or
No.
are you a member of that board?
Uh,
As an accountant, are you part of the organization in theory?
No, I mean, we're members of, now you're kind of over my head in structure,
but
sorry.
you can be. I mean, it's
You
like what
can.
he's saying, you can be. It's just, they may not have a member on the board, but it's made up of a professional accountancy, you know.
But it's not a federal government
No.
or some other?
No, we're desperately trying to not be.
Yeah.
That
They're
isn't to say that
self-governed.
The government doesn't have influence on.
Right, the government definitely has
acceptable
influence, and we
On GAAP
definitely
policies.
have to work with them. I mean, it's like everything else, or we're not going to have any, but they need us as well, because, you know, the accountants are the ones that understand that.
The motivation for changing the accounting standards, correct me if I'm wrong, is a perceived fiduciary responsibility.
It is,
To
it
be
is,
more accurate.
absolutely. And accountants in general are conservative folks, they want everything out there transparent, and they're more often than not gonna be conservative in recognizing liabilities and disclosing information, hence.
We apologize for digressing. Anything else?
Yes, no, that's great. It's great to hear the discussion and to see how fired up people are about politics. It's always great. While you were talking, I paged to find where I can point you to more, and maybe some of you have already read this, but starting in note 10 on page 39 through page 48, an additional 10 pages, just one footnote on the retirement plans. So just so you know, there is a lot of information there, including references, as I said, to our state system that you can go look up more information. Because, as one of you pointed out, you know, spreading the risk of being in that pool also has you lose power of managing that pool. So it's a catch-22 there. So anyway, you can read that footnote. I won't read it to you, I promise. So okay. So that is the big adjustment that occurred during this year, or I don't want to say adjustment, but the big change that happened. Maria and Sarah worked through that, and so it's not a finding, not a deficiency of any kind, but it is, your statements have been adjusted to reflect prior year liability as well as bringing in the current year. So moving on then through the statements, again, I did speak very briefly about the statement of cash flow, which is on page 23, if you're looking at page numbers at the bottom of the page. If you're in an iPad or something, I'm not quite sure how to lead you to that. I'm not sure what page that would be. It would probably be something after that, maybe 30 or something like that. But anyway, the statement of cash flow, just really want to point out that, as I mentioned before, your cash did come down this year from almost $900,000 at the beginning of the year or end of last year to $300,000 this year. But again, that's largely due to investing in either your STIP pools and investments that are out there, or in your capital asset improvements, those kinds of things. So nothing to be concerned about there. Again, unmodified, so we're very comfortable with these statements and the position that you're showing here, which is very healthy. Over $4 million of unrestricted net position, so that's a good thing. Again, starting on page 25 and really rolling all the way through to about page 49 are the footnotes that support the numbers in the balance sheet and the income statement, mostly the balance sheet. So that's where you can find more detailed information about the investments that you're invested in, the capital improvements that you've invested in, additions and disposals that happen during the year. Things like the policies that you have here that hopefully don't change much from year to year. You implement policy and you stick with it so you have some comparative levels to compare information from year to year. Other information in here, the long-term debt that you mentioned, there's more information in here about rates and all kinds of, maturity dates, that kind of stuff. How much are we expected to pay in the next year and the next 5 years? Information like that is included in here. How much are we going to pay in interest is included in here. There's also details about your passenger facility charges in here. And I mentioned to you that there are 4 reports. So I talked about the first one. There are 2 reports specifically related to your FAA grants and AIP programs, your airport improvement programs. There are 2 reports that allude or that cover that portion of money and expenditures in your financial statements, also unmodified. And finally, there's a 4th report unique to airports, and that is a compliance report on your passenger facility charge program. And that's just to say that we have looked at that. We've looked at the money that's come in on that and money you've spent, and that we agree that it's fairly presented as well. Okay, so again, 4 reports, all clean. I'm kind of hurrying. I don't want to take too much of your time. I would entertain any questions about anything specific. Again, just to ask John, Maria, and the audit committee to pipe up or bring up any topics that you thought were important we should talk about. We might have kind of done that at the beginning. It's always a pleasure to work with John and Maria. Everything was ready for us. I always tell the audit committee this, but I want you to know as a board that your management does a great job planning and getting ready for us. We come in and the documents are ready. Actually, they're ready long before we get here. They're sending them to us way in advance through the secure portal. Maria's very organized, efficient, just answering questions and producing information on the fly. We always surprise. We like to surprise sometimes with asking for things unexpected. I think it went very well, and we thank you for that.
And just so the board knows, we did release a press release today, that our draft audit was out, and a couple of highlights we pointed out for the public are this is our 6th consecutive record year of passengers, also a record year for operating revenue. I think 4 out of the last 5 years have been record year for operating revenue. And then expenses were pretty much unchanged. I think we're down a slight %, but that was mainly overtime because we had a light winter, so for the most part unchanged. So I think financially it was a very successful year, and a lot of the, like I said, strategies we put in place for the last few years have realized. The fastest growing revenue source was food and beverage, news and gift, as we've had a full year now of operation in our new concession area. So I think that's a positive trend.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you, Annette.
Thank you.
Appreciate
We'll
it.
get out of your hair.
So I
figuratively speaking.
Thank you.
For some of us, most of us on the board. Seems to be a majority of the.
It's hard to say it's a malady when there's so many of us. Maybe it's the new normal.
So I believe it came from the audit committee to approve the audit as presented by AZ.
Yes, agreed.
Yep.
So if there is no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to accept the audit presented by AZ as recommended by the audit committee, then all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay.
Or you,
I've never not had a motion in a second
I was gonna say,
Oh, there wasn't a second?
you
Okay.
have to have a motion first
from
and
a
then
board
second.
member, yeah,
Okay.
not just from AZ.
I thought there was a recommendation from the
I'll do
board.
it.
No, he said from the committee.
Do we have to vote again?
Okay,
Aye.
is there a motion
Yes.
to accept it?
I second the motion.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, all those opposed? The upper shop purchase.
Yeah, we got an unsolicited offer from AdMax to purchase that upper shop building over there. As I've said before, we're a little tight on space, but you know, Rod, under much duress, has figured out a way to reshuffle things to get us by for 2 years till we expand that building. And so last year we came to the board and we recommended a sale price of $250 based on an appraisal of $259. AdMax's offer is at $200,000. So what we're recommending is that we add the residual into the ground rent. As you can see there, we're recommending a $200,000 cash purchase with a 40-year lease underneath it, and then the ground rent would work out to about $2,150 for the square footage, and then an additional $1,250 per year for the unrealized purchase price. So we'd be just over about $3,500 per year in ground rent for the next 40 years. That would escalate, obviously, with inflation. But then we're asking that we be allowed to continue to use the sand bay. There's one segregated bay in the back where we have our sand. Right now, we have to keep the sand warm so it doesn't freeze in the wintertime, and that's we don't have anywhere else to do that right now. So we've presented these terms to AdMax, and we think they're agreeable. They seem to be agreeable. They're going to talk about it, but we would recommend that we do sell the building for the $200,000, $3,200 in ground rent and a 40-year lease.
And they were happy with us subleasing a portion of it back for our uses?
Actually, we're saying now, you know, for the sand bay, we would just, you know, we're not going to pay for that. Just for the next 2 years to 3 years, we need to use that at no cost. Luckily, it's a one little garage bay door in the back, so it doesn't really hinder their use of the building. And then they would use the rest of the building, and then once we're out of there in 3 years, they would take over the remainder.
Have you already talked to them about adding the remainder of the purchase price back into the?
I sent them these exact terms, what the ground rent would be, what the land, the purchase price would be. So yeah, they're aware of, you know, exactly what we've got here.
They seem receptive?
Yeah, no, they said, you know, they thought that was fair, and they were going to talk about it up in Calgary. So I'm hopeful that this, you know, we'll get it done.
So if there's a motion to accept the staff recommendation, then it's as proposed here. It doesn't give you any leeway.
No, this is what.
This is the offer, and they take it, otherwise you have to come back to the board.
Yeah, we'd have to come back to the board. And I think that's prudent. I mean, this is pretty much what they've offered. So I think, you know, we should be, I would hope, enough to finish the deal.
Any other questions or a motion?
I move that we offer the building for sale at those terms.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion or questions?
I have a question. We're not taking any account the time value of money of the 50,000,
No, we're not.
and that's on purpose?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we've batted this around for, about a year now, trying to find a way to make the transaction work. And I think getting the cash up front, as opposed to the last time what we had offered was we would basically finance it in at 6% for the next 40 years, the entire purchase price. Now what they're saying is they'll pay us up front the $200,000, and then, we're in effect carrying the other 50 in at the ground lease rate, and bearing it into the ground lease. And I think, we could certainly go back and propose, a higher rent or something like that. Just in the interest of getting this, this transaction done for AdMax, we think, this is probably a reasonable compromise between the two.
There's some issues with that building anyway, right?
Well, it's a pretty good building for us. Honestly, if we, if
That's
we
not the
didn't.
roof, it's not the roof.
Oh,
issue,
no.
That's the wrong building.
No, this building's a cinder block construction. It's a pretty doggone good building. And honestly, we've had one additional call. They wanted to do a partial on it. Of course, when it rains, it pours, right? So we had, a call just a few days after this memo went out from a local broker that had a tenant interested in a partial use of the building. But, again, I think in past discussions, we've had interest in trying to get AdMax, to expand. And this would be really their first owned asset on the airport. So I think there is value in trying to, to lean into it and get the deal done.
And their intent is to bring engine maintenance to this location using that building, right?
Actually, Mauricio brought that up in his first email. They would not put the engine maintenance in at this time. Right now, they just need it for the expansion of their current operation. Ideally, eventually, that they will bring the engine shop here also. But what he said is they're just hard pressed for additional space right now.
Any other questions, comments? All those in favor of the motion to approve the staff recommendation as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. Value Park.
Yep, we just need to set a couple of rates, the value park and the metered lot. As you can see on here, we're recommending for the value park that we have the ability to fluctuate that rate up and down between 21 and 30 to allow for seasonal opportunities to fill the lot a little bit more. And then on the metered lot, it'd just be a straight 30 minutes for $1, and that would go to a 4-hour max. After 4 hours, you have to be out of there because we want to encourage turnover in there. They're really meant to be drop-off, pickup type of passengers.
Did you say the metered lot, John?
Yes, the metered lot, yeah. That's the one right out the window here.
John, I have a question. I've had some comments on folks when I've tried to explain what Value Park meant. And when I have explained it, they say, well, that's all well and good, but I'm not likely to park out there on a day like this. And folks don't know what things cost, and I don't know that I do either. Would there be some means of providing a shuttle? What would that cost?
Shuttle
is there
operations.
a fee that you could charge that would make it a wash?
It's about $100,000 a year to run a shuttle. It's super expensive. But I think if you take today as a good example, we've got over a dozen cars sitting out there right now.
They didn't come in this afternoon, though.
No.
They walked over yesterday.
Yeah, walked over yesterday. But the whole idea with the value park is, we have some people that are willing to take the additional hassle to, and what we've told people is, bring your family up to the front, drop off your bags, send the kids in with mom, and then have dad just go park the car by himself, and then do the reverse operation on the way back through. That way only one person's walking with no luggage. The whole idea is to, those people that really want a good deal, to give them the option of parking a little further away, to open up spots for the other people. Last year at Christmas time, we had 70-some people parked in the Value Park area, but then it was just overflow parking, and they got no discount price. I think if we can find that right spot, we're going to bring people that are parking at hotels right now, or that are getting dropped off or picked up. If we can find that right spot without really interrupting the day-to-day business use of the main lot. But yeah, the shuttle operations are really, really expensive.
Have you ever seen it done where a contract is made or an arrangement is made with a local cab company where for a reasonable fee they will in inclement weather like this, shuttle people back and forth?
Boy, I can tell you, our cab company is not set up to do that. I mean, we get a lot of complaints that people are late to flights because they don't get picked up. I think there's 3 cars in town. I'm not sure how many drivers there are, but you know, that's one. We have people miss flights because they called the night before and got a reservation, and the guy doesn't come in time. So you know, I would not put them into our operation. I understand what you're saying. I think we'll be surprised. I think there's enough value seekers in Great Falls. I mean, they're already walking that far from Walmart in a lot of cases, into the Walmart, you know, in a lot of cases, you know.
Uber?
That's a hot topic.
Yeah, maybe if we had Uber in the state of Montana.
Uber and Lyft.
Parking, can you come get me in Value Park? Any other questions?
2 hours.
Okay, staff recommends having the flexibility to adjust the weekly rates between $21 and $30. And they're also recommending the metered parking out here at $1 for each 30 minutes. Is there a motion to that effect?
I'll make the motion, as you stated it, as it's presented.
Okay, is there a
I'll
second? It's been moved and seconded. Any other further questions?
Do you expect, maybe you said this and I was not focused, do you expect to change that, not just on supply and demand, but seasonality?
Yeah, we won't change it week to week. It'll be more like, you know, month to month. You know, at Christmas time, and motivations are different too. At Christmas time, we want to do it, we want to keep it fairly low because we want to encourage people to park over there, to open up spots for the people that have trouble walking through the lot. You know, as we get into spring, it's really part of the package of what we're trying to sell to the Canadians because they travel heavily until May.
Right.
And so, you know, I mean, and it's interesting, Vivian's not here, but on Facebook, when we announced the Value Park at $25 through the remainder of the year, we got a lot of comment back from Calgary folks, hey, that's great. You know, so I mean, again, you're hitting them at a price point where they go, hey, wait a minute, I'm saving $50, $60 on my parking in addition to whatever I'm saving on my airfare. You know, so we get them interested in the airport that way. And in addition, we know that, you know, a lot of the hotels let people stay for $5 a day, you know, or something like that. But when you come home at 11 o'clock at night waiting for that hotel shuttles, you know, it's a stress point for people. You know, so giving them an option that's competitive with that. We even found out, you know, that some of them are parking at the local storage yards. You know, where you put your RV. A couple of those are now in the parking business where they're allowing people to park there. So, you know, we want to have a product that competes for that low-end parking. Otherwise, we begin to lose market share in that sector of the parking market. So that's where I think, you know, that some flexibility from season to season makes sense.
So the Value Park is going to be the same rate then as the long-term parking?
Same daily rate,
Other than
but
just
then a
it's
cap.
weekly?
Yep, yeah, and that opens up the ability to play with the cap on the other product. The short-term lot is uncapped, so you know you pay $12 a day to stay there, and there's no cap to it. The long-term lot right now is capped at $35, so you got 5 days at $7, and then you're capped out. And then if you think about 5 days at $7, it's $35. So we're giving people today at $25 what we plan to have the Value Park at through Christmas. We're giving them a $10 discount. And we run a lot of coupons now. That's one of the reasons we came up with this Value Park is we've been couponing the last 3 years, Laura, has it been?
Yeah.
And the parking revenue has grown disproportionate to the passenger volume, which tells us there's price elasticity there, that at a lower rate we can probably increase revenue. Same thing we've tried to tell the airlines the last few years, and finally we're realizing it, is now the revenue in the market's higher by lowering the rate. Doesn't always make sense, but oftentimes it does.
Any other questions? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, unanimous, okay. Budget variance.
Yes, as we discussed last month, we continue to think we're still in the hunt for those Chicago flights in the current fiscal year. And the way we set up our incentive policy, we told the board that we would come back for budget variances if we offer too many marketing packages that we don't think we'll actually realize, rather than budget for that money and have extra money in our budget that we don't spend. and artificially inflate the expense side of things, it made more sense if we're not confident we're going to get that to come back for a variance. And so the United route carried a marketing promise of about $20,000 from the airport if we get the additional Chicago flights. About 5 of that we would have spent in Chicago anyhow, because we've been marketing in Chicago now for 3 or 4 years, and we are asking the board for a variance, an increase of the marketing budget of $15,000 to cover the remainder of the marketing incentive offered on that route. When we go to do our budget for next year, we'll just include it as a budget item, because at that point it will be known as a likely expense item, so we won't need the budget next year, the budget variance next year, but this year we didn't budget for this particular incentive.
Any questions? Is there a motion to support the staff's recommendation to increase the marketing expenses by $15,000 to make it a total of $20,000 marketing incentive for the new Chicago flight?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
You're only going to spend that if we get the flight, right?
Exactly, yeah, we would only offer it as an incentive.
We're ready to go if we get the flights.
And ideally, sometime in the next 3 weeks, spring schedules will come out. So ideally, we'll have some type of announcement between now and Christmas if we realize that flight. So you may see we'll send you a press conference today type notice. If you're interested in coming up, you're more than welcome. We'll invite the press up to announce the new route if we can get it. But that announcement is imminent. It will probably be in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Are there any other agenda items to be brought forward at this time? Any other items? Okay, Airport Authority comments. Commissioner Buck, any comments?
Just an offer that he'd like me to talk to Colonel Smith and his staff about what would be involved in obtaining military construction funding. For that realm, I'll be happy to talk to him.
Yeah, I wanted to, he's been very supportive, and I definitely need to get in touch with him and see what his thoughts are on that. I know the timing isn't ideal, but let me give him a ring and kind of see where he is on the whole thing. Now that it's kind of emerging from the mist and we see what the entirety of the program costs are going to be, I think the timing's right to call him and see.
Factor one thing in, he's active duty,
Right.
which means he's probably planning his move right about now to his next assignment. So he may not be in the front of his mind.
Uh-oh.
Commissioner Rooney, any comments?
None?
Commissioner Hogan?
None.
Commissioner Goodson?
Nope.
Harrison?
Well, I have a couple.
Comments?
Guys
Go
count
for
on
it.
me. My first question was there any, I don't know, discussion or repercussion to that flight that got diverted to Billings? That it
No.
could have easily been diverted here?
Yes. In fact, we were a more logical choice given that we have customs on site.
Right,
If you saw the
right.
paper article, people drove, they sent customs from here over there. No, there's been no, this is not uncommon in times of fight and threat. It's comes down to a judgment call by the airline, and they land them wherever they land them. So it is, we are entering a period of increased threat. You probably saw today the TSA put out a traffic advisory, and so we can expect some of these. Fortunately, none of them materialized into any events.
I don't
But
think we would have been in a very good position to try to offer kosher food either, would we?
oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
wasn't that one of the things they were,
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, think about that. That was
Yeah.
quite an undertaking to get everything put together.
Well, and when we had WestJet land, I'm not sure any of you were on the board then, but we had a cross-country Canadian flight land that was a WestJet flight, and we don't have any relationship with WestJet whatsoever. So even trying to get in touch with someone that could give us a credit card number to feed the folks, all those types of things. I mean, the minute the plane lands, back then it was Stephanie, and the first thing I said to Stephanie is, find out who they are, where their ops base is, and find somebody with a credit card, that can, as things come up, that we can work with. And, I said, I'm going to go to lunch when I come back. We'll see if they're still out there, and if so, we're going to have to start feeding them. And, and that's how it went. We had them for darn near 10 hours, I think, because they had landed heavy and they had to send an engineer to make sure the plane was okay. They had a cardiac arrest and they landed and got the person off, but when they land heavy, they have to check the plane over. So yeah, we had them for about 10 hours and everything worked fine. We found an area to quarantine them in, and Customs actually was very helpful. They sent people over to watch them to make sure no one, was not accounted for, and but in those cases you don't have a manifest oftentimes. In the case of this El Al flight, they had a manifest that they would have already run through the system, so there's at least a very high level of security on them already done.
It seemed like most of the public comments on social media were directed at Billings. Why isn't there any Customs people there, as opposed to why didn't the flight land somewhere else, or what have you?
And I mean, this is something Missoula struggles with too, is they've been interested in having Customs, but you probably remember the increased cost we had just 2 years ago. I mean, Customs is a very difficult customer, and every few years they modify their standards for what they need. But I would tell any airport, if you're considering having full international status, which is what we have, the minimum ante is probably $1 million worth of facilities to get started. And that's assuming you don't have any odd irregularities, because the list of things you have to provide is so big. I mean, they have to have a bathroom with a place to handcuff someone, or an office with a place to handcuff someone that has a bathroom in it. And they have to have inventory storage that's completely secure, and with the walls that can't be cut through. I mean, it just becomes a very big undertaking. And not a very flexible agency to work with, so there isn't a lot of latitude there. So, and then you've got the operating problems. Because of sequestration now, they close the office at 5 o'clock. And it used to be you could schedule ahead and have them here for more hours, and they would pay the overtime. And now that's become a really difficult situation. So, the payback for what you get. If we didn't have FedEx with those international flights every weekend, I would struggle to keep that port open. And we have, what would you say, 2 to 3 average flights, per day that clear through there. And, and if it weren't for FedEx, I don't think we could justify it.
Well, the other question you alluded to already was, have you had concern from the public about today's announcement? Have you heard anything yet?
No, there's not been any. I don't know if Vivian, we could certainly, if we have a break, ask Vivian if she's gotten any calls. But I don't know of anything that's come in yet.
That was all.
Is that it? I have no comments either, but other than thank you to the audit committee for your diligence and meeting with the auditors and going through that item by item. Appreciate that very much. Any comments from the public at this time?
Just follow on to Deb's comment about Customs. You may recall that there's 3 different classifications, airport classifications for Customs. And as John mentioned, we are a true international classification. Bozeman wanted to have Customs, and most recently established themselves to do that, but they're a user fee airport, so aircraft that desire to clear there have to pay a fee that I believe the airport establishes to recover their expenses. I was concerned if that way you rode our traffic through Great Falls, and it's amazing how many aircraft still clear here in Great Falls where there is no cost to the aircraft other than the landing fee.
Right.
And then they reposition.
If they qualify for that, because many of them don't even pay a
and
landing
then
fee.
they reposition to Bozeman. So again, these other cities that choose not to, it's a very large undertaking that has definitely going to be upside down money-wise.
Why wouldn't they qualify, John? Because they...
Planes that are under 50,000 pounds don't have to pay a landing fee. So a lot of our traffic is Canadian.
12,500.
Oh, I'm sorry, 12,500. A lot of our air traffic is, smaller planes circuiting back and forth over the border, and so many of them don't have to pay.
Typically, those would take fuel, those would
Yeah.
take
Fuel
an
flowage.
amount of flowage fee, so there would be token amount coming in, but the larger ones certainly don't need to fill oftentimes.
Believe it or not, I think this is still true. I think we're the largest customs clearance point between Minneapolis and Seattle, and the largest capacity. Spokane did increase their capacity, but I think they're still smaller than what we're allowed to handle, because they've agreed to do up to 36 people per flight, and they've done more on a few occasions. This summer, we had a lot of firefighters come through with more than that, and they processed those, which we really appreciated. I mean, that was important, I think, for everybody to have those people get through.
Any other public comments? Okay, with no further business come before the board, I declare the meeting adjourned, and you got 5 minutes and we're back rolling again. This should be quick.
It's quick. It's quick.
5 minutes and we're out of here.
Oh,
That's what we're doing down on the